Hello, I'm Nuala McGovern. You're watching The Context on BBC News. Alarm in Japan as North Korea fires a missile over its territory for the first time in 5 years. International condemnation as the US and South Korea respond with military exercises off the Korean peninsula. Also, more pressure on Liz Truss from within her party. This time calls to commit to an increase in benefits in line with inflation. Ukrainian forces seize back more territory in southern and eastern Ukraine that has been illegally annexed by Russia. And lawyers for Elon Musk say he intends to go ahead with the purchase of Twitter after pulling out of an original deal to buy the company. Tonight, with The Context, former UK Justice Secretary and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Gauke, and Democratic strategist, Mary-Ann March. Welcome to the programme. Well, with the war in Ukraine, a global cost of living crisis and continuing tension with both China and Iran, the nuclear threat of North Korea has not been top of the agenda in the West. But in a clear reminder of its arsenal, North Korea fired a ballistic missile test over Japan. Now, the missile was the fifth one launched in 10 days and travelled about 4,600 kilometres before falling into the Pacific Ocean. The range is believed to have been the longest distance ever travelled for a North Korean test flight. And the missile went far enough that it would have reached the US island of Guam if it had a different trajectory. And so there was a swift response. The US and South Korea conducted precision aerial bombing exercises to demonstrate Seoul and Washington's will to respond sternly to the threat from Pyongyang. And Tokyo was also incensed. Ellen Kim is Deputy Director of the Korea Chair at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Joins us now. You're very welcome to the programme. Do you think this is different, this particular test, to previous ones? Mary-Ann, let me turn to you. It did fall off the agenda somewhat, I think, perhaps with other global events. Ellen is listing some of the ways the US is thinking about deterrence options, but what do you think the US should do? Ellen Kim, thank you so much for joining us here on The Context.
Thank you.
Right, let us get into UK politics. Liz Truss should be enjoying her first Conservative Party conference as Prime Minister, but instead the conference is being dominated by party divisions. Many, including her cabinet colleague Penny Mordaunt, are unhappy at her refusal to commit to increasing benefits for the poorest people in line with inflation. And while her Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has accused fellow Conservative MPs of staging a coup to force a U-turn on the top rate of tax for high earners, the International Trade Secretary, Badenoch, has described that language, the coup, as inflammatory. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has been speaking to the Prime Minister in Birmingham. Liz Truss speaking there to our political editor. Let's take a look at some of the numbers on benefit payments that are currently dividing Conservatives. This first graph here, this shows how benefit payments, you see, are already falling behind inflation. Could get worse, with inflation expected to keep rising in the short term. But as the government looks to find savings, this chart shows why they might try to cut benefit spending, which is at £87 billion, is twice the defence budget, though you see there dwarfed by the health budget. Let me start with you, David. Perhaps first also that argument, they did the U-turn on the tax rate for the highest earners, but now it's all about those receiving benefits and whether they should increase benefits with inflation. At the moment, we think around 10% or in line with wages, which comes in more like 5%. What do you think is the road they will and perhaps the road they should take? We will wait and see. She did come out as well, Mary-Ann, I should just say. She did say she wouldn't commit to saying that she trusted her Chancellor, but then she did come out later, an hour or so afterwards, saying that she did trust Kwasi Kwarteng. So just things are moving very quickly. So just to add that there as well. More on American politics before too long. But before that, let's turn to Ukraine and Russia. They say there is now fierce fighting near the southern city of Kherson. That's after Ukrainian forces made a key breakthrough to retake the area, which has been occupied by Russia since early in the war. Let's take a look. These are the latest pictures coming into us. You can see Russian flags have been pulled down and replaced with Ukrainian ones. And the Russian military has admitted it has lost ground in the Kherson area, but it is also under pressure in the northeast of Ukraine. Do you see those circles in green? That's the areas of significant fighting in the past 24 hours. Now, Ukrainian forces recently recaptured the important hub in the town of Liman in the east. That's near the Luhansk regional border. And it's clear from this report by our correspondent Orla Guerin that the Russians were forced to flee at speed. And a warning, her report contains some images that viewers may find upsetting. Thanks to Orla. Well, let's get analysis of what's happening on the ground from Dr. Frank Ledwidge, who's a former military intelligence officer and now teaches military strategy at the University of Portsmouth. You're very welcome to The Context. Let's talk about Liman. Why is that so significant? So that's what that is about. But I want to turn to you, David, for a moment. You know, we saw some of the pictures there from my colleague Orla Guerin's report. Towns that are devastated, even if it is that the Ukrainians are getting the upper hand, as we were hearing from Dr. Frank Ledwidge. What do you think it's appropriate for the UK or the West to do to help those areas, if anything?
There's clearly going to be a need for very substantial support from the West for Ukraine to enable it to recover. I mean, ultimately, of course, everybody wants to get reparations from Russia, and that's right and proper. But in the immediate future, Ukraine does need to be rebuilt. That is in our security interests as well. A strong and vibrant and Western-orientated Ukraine can strengthen our own security here. And in the end, Putin must fail and the Ukrainian people must prevail. And if that requires financial support to Ukraine afterwards, along the lines of the Marshall Plan that the US provided Western Europe after the Second World War, then that has to be the right course of action. And I think that genuinely would be a good investment in terms of cementing Ukraine's position as essentially a Western-orientated European power.
Let us see what happens. I should mention as well that there has been more rocket systems supplied by President Joe Biden. That was announced. It will happen for $624 million. And also Mr. Zelensky thanking him for that today. I want to thank Dr. Frank Ledwidge. Still stay with us if you can here on The Context.
I stand with Afghan girls and Afghan women, and I want to bring attention to their voices.
Нет, Россия не белая, не пушистая. Россия такая, какая она есть. И мы не стыдимся показывать себя такими, какими мы есть.
I would like to think that we can see a new range of leadership traits being modelled where kindness isn't seen as weakness.
The way to counter Russia is through strength.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
Hello, I'm Nuala McGovern. You're watching The Context on BBC News. The crucial midterm elections, which will determine the balance of power in Washington, are just 5 weeks away today. Also, President Biden is keeping the abortion issue at the fore of voters' minds. He reaffirms his party's commitment to protecting reproductive rights. Elon Musk will become the new owner of Twitter, it appears. The company has confirmed they have accepted his offer. The response to Hurricane Ian is being questioned in Florida as the death toll rises to over 100. Tonight, with The Context, former UK Justice Secretary and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, David Gauke, and Democratic strategist, Mary Ann Marsh. Welcome back to the programme. Well, we start with some breaking news that Twitter has confirmed that Elon Musk has offered to purchase the company for a second time and that the company intends to complete the transaction. So that would be selling at $54.20 a share. We're going to be able to cross now to New York and to our business correspondent, Samira Hussein. Samira, great to have you with us. So talk us through what's been happening over the past few hours. Musk-induced turmoil. I love that. Samira, thanks so much. Let me turn to you, Marianne. Like, love, hate the thought of Mr. Musk owning Twitter? Well, Marianne, we're going to move on to US midterms with 2022, 2024, of course, just around the corner as well. But the midterms are just 5 weeks away. Dealing with the rising cost of living and inflation, big issues for many voters. But Democrats are redoubling their efforts to make abortion the defining issue of these elections. Later, President Joe Biden will be highlighting his administration's efforts to protect access to abortion as he marks 100 days since the Supreme Court overturned a national right to the procedure. And Democrats hope the issue will galvanise their voters ahead of these midterms. We're joined by Anthony Zerker, our North America correspondent. Great to have you with us. He's in Washington, D.C. How is this issue 100 days after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, as I mentioned? How is it playing out on the campaign trail? So interesting. And Marianne, let me turn to you briefly before coming to David. I was just reading a statement by Donald Trump and that he just put out in the past hour or so. And he said Herschel Walker is being slandered and maligned by the fake news media and obviously the Democrats. And he goes on to, in that vein, very much supporting him. Do you think this story about Herschel Walker will change his campaign among those who have supported him previously? Thanks, Marianne. Thanks also to Anthony joining us from Washington, D.C. Now, I want to turn to the hurricane. Almost 400,000 homes and businesses are still without power in Florida. This is 5 days after Hurricane Ian crashed across that state. Let's take a look at the latest pictures. These are coming in from one of the worst affected areas in Florida. The search and rescue teams, they doubled back to examine homes and businesses as over 100 people have been killed in one of America's fiercest storms on record. Utilities have been restored to most customers that were affected by the storm after more than 5 million customers in Florida, also in North and South Carolina, lost power. But already the discussion is about how to move forward and rebuild. And I want to bring in Arup Ganguly, a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Northeastern University in Boston. Welcome to The Context. There's often these questions after hurricanes, perhaps like Ian or Katrina comes to mind as well, about whether people should continue to live in those areas and whether when the cleanup or the rebuilding begins, whether it should again start in those same locations that are prone to extreme weather events. What do you think? I understand. Really interesting, I have to say. Great to have you with us, Professor Ganguly. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let me turn to you, David. I mean, we're becoming so used to these extreme weather events, and I don't know whether there's ever a way to climate change proof an area. But do you think that government and policies are beginning to think at all in the way that Professor Ganguly was putting forth? Let us see what happens going forward. Just devastating, though, what has happened for some of those people down in Florida and the Carolinas. Now, however, on The Context, I want to turn to time for the panel. Marianne, can I turn to you? What is the issue that you want to share with our viewers? Interesting one, David. I hadn't seen that. Thanks so much for bringing it to our attention. Thanks so much for joining us on The Context as well. That is David Gauck, and we also had Mary Ann Marsh. Christian is back with you tomorrow on The Context. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you will again tomorrow. Goodbye.
Hello there. A little area of low pressure has been bringing wet and windy weather to the mid-Atlantic states in the US.